Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER Pod. Have you ever wondered how stress really affects the way we eat? In today's episode, we explore the emotional and psychological side of eating habits with eating psychology coach Alexandra. She shares how stress, societal pressures, and past experiences all shape our food choices. We discuss intuitive eating, stress management, and how to navigate challenges like disordered eating. Ready to rethink how you approach food? Let's dive in.
It's so great to see you again.
Great to see you too.
I'm very excited because this is a topic that I'm very interested in. I do have some personal experiences with the whole eating disorder world, and it's not something that I talked about until this podcast, and I still don't talk about it a lot. So I'm very glad to be talking to somebody who really knows this from a professional standpoint, and I feel like it'll really help me personally and also help people in my life that I know are struggling with eating habits and different eating struggles. So let's get right into it. What is a eating psychology coach?
So, an eating psychology coach helps people work in their relationship with food. And this is like, it's a huge spectrum, right? Because yes, like there are eating disorders which are officially diagnosed with the DSM, but we all have our own relationship with food, and it tends to be complex, right? Because food can be many things at the same time besides nourishment and fuel. It is also culture, community, family, and all these different emotions. So basically what we do is we work with people with their own relationship with food that has evolved throughout their own stories, throughout their own situations, conditions, and everything in between, right? So because when we're eating something, there might be many things behind it, or when we're not eating.
I think that's a very good point, because I was listening to something a while ago, and it was somebody talking about their experience with addiction from drugs, and he was saying that he cannot imagine people who struggle with either food addictions or not eating food, because food is something that is constantly in our life. It's constantly around us. We have to eat 3 times a day or whatever. So it's not something that you consciously have to go out and buy. It's something that is constantly surrounded, and it's something that you can never escape. So I think that's a really good point, that the relationship there is so important, rather than just saying, okay, you struggle with this and we just gotta fix it, right?
Yeah, and it is like that whole topic of food addiction. It's a little bit controversial, and I come from the intuitive eating framework. So basically, we don't actually think of food or eating as an addiction. Yes, it can feel as an addiction, like something more powerful than you, but that is more because of the meanings we're giving it. Because if you think about it, like alcohol dependence, or like alcohol is a toxin. It is damaging our bodies, right? Food, unless you're eating something you're allergic to or something like that, food is not hurting your body. Like many people might say, okay, I'm addicted to sugar, right? But there is way more. Yes, like definitely our current like food offerings, the most abundant, yes, they're filled with sugar. They're very refined. So the original nutrients from the plants, for example, that they used to have, they don't have anymore. But it's more also, it's widely available. And yes, food is comforting to a certain degree. So yes, if you're feeling some sort of difficult emotions, food can do a little bit to tame them down. But we also need to understand that there's only so much food can do. So that can't be our go-to, our exclusive go-to way of dealing with our emotions. That's where the problem is. Not because we really can't.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Stop eating. It's more like, why can't we stop eating? What are we trying to find in food?
Right. So this goes into my next question. How is eating psychology or an eating psychology coach different from a regular nutritionist or regular dietitian? How do you guys go about things that are different from someone that's doing the other route?
So I studied nutrition in the 90s, like in the early 90s. So it was like a whole different thing back then. But it's more like thinking of food more like as a prescription, you know, like, oh, you have to eat this amount of that, and like there were people weighing their food and doing all these things. But and now it's evolved a bit, and some dietitians do take into account the emotional state, etc. But in general, it's more like a prescription. You eat this and that, this amounts of times a day, and this much fiber, this much, you know, and for a few people it might work, right? But for the majority it doesn't, because it's, as we were talking before, you know, like there's more in there. Like, you're using food for something, and if you don't become aware of what that is, and also develop other strategies to cope with those things that are bothering you, you're gonna keep trying to find it in food.
Yeah. So many people see dieting as the solution, and you focus a lot more about the psychology behind eating habits. Is there something about your approach that is unique?
Well, I merged like a bunch of different approaches, but mainly it's eating psychology and also intuitive eating. And intuitive eating is a weight neutral model.
Which means
so basically, so I don't weigh my clients.
Oh, okay.
We don't like the whole, because there's a point to that, because weight becomes a distractor, right? Like when people, I mean, unless, for example, someone is recovering from anorexia, and just to make sure, like that is the only time when it is important to make sure. But many times they don't see their weight, because it like the weight becomes such like a disruptor in what, because that's all we care about, and it's easy to measure it. But weight changes even throughout one day. If we weighted ourselves several times a day, it might be different. Depending if we went to the bathroom, if we drank 2 glasses of water, you know, and it just becomes like a very, very important measurement of our value, of our of who we are, and it is not. So and now there's more and more research and like coming out about, it's not about the number. It's like BMI, which used to be a standard of like to measure health. It doesn't really do anything in order to indicate a person's actual health status.
I remember when I was recovering from my eating situation, I knew, thank God, because I worked with really good people, that the number doesn't really mean that you're healthy. For me, actually, it started from a place where I was very scared of getting sick. It was after my grandfather got diagnosed with cancer, and so I thought food was, you know, this toxic thing for my body. So the number on the scale was actually something that was very terrifying to me. I haven't owned a scale in years, and I go based off how I feel as a person. Do I have energy to go to the gym, right? Am I feeling weak when I take 3 steps? It's all about how I feel, which is exactly what you talk about with the intuitive eating.
No, me too. It just, again, there's some circumstances, even at doctor's offices, you know, sometimes even you get weighed and the doctor or the nurse comments, or you feel ashamed. So many times people stop going to the doctor because they're so ashamed and so scared of being weighed in. And sometimes it's not necessary. So it's actually good to ask the doctor, is this necessary, or can I be blind weighted, which is like you turn your back and you don't see the number. If they need it for the records, they can write it down.
Smart.
But if it's disturbing, which is, it can be very triggering for many people.
I'm curious why, this is a statistic that you have on your website, that 95% of people who lose weight end up gaining it back within 1 to 5 years. Why is that?
And sometimes there's the statistic even goes to 98%. But basically because dieting doesn't work. It goes against the nature of the body, against its own balances. So when you start restricting calories at the beginning, you lose weight and you feel like a champ. Then you enter the cycle, right? You start like, oh my gosh, I'm rocking this diet, I'm getting so skinny. But at some point, the body is like, I can't live with this. This is not enough for me to survive. And we end up overeating or binging, or we end up breaking the diet usually. And then we start gaining weight, and then we feel terrible again. So we begin a new diet because the new one, it is like that one's gonna work. And then we go the same cycle over and over. But every time we do the cycle, our body tries to adapt to the calorie deficit. So our metabolism slows down every single time. So every time we diet, we start conditioning our body to burn less calories.
Wow.
So it happens many times that people just eat very, very little and they can't lose any weight.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are other, like, for example, in the case of anorexia, the overeating doesn't happen in some cases, but it's actually, it puts life at risk. It's like even more dangerous. So
yeah, that's actually a perfect segue. I want to ask you to explain what's the difference between anorexia, bulimia, and body dysmorphia. I think a lot of people have no idea what the differences are and are really not educated.
They are three different things, and although they can be very similar in some cases. So let's start with bulimia.
Okay.
Bulimia is like when there are two things that like characterizes bulimia. Like, so it's the binging and the purging. So binges are when people eat in about a period of 2 hours, like amounts of food that no one would eat under a normal circumstance, like a whole pizza pie, or just like things that are very large. Okay, and so that is a binge, and it usually comes with a lot of guilt and a lot of like negative feelings. And then there's the purging. So it's kind of like a way of compensating. So that can be abusing laxatives, abusing diuretics, other medication, fasting, exercising for like 5 hours every day, or just there's that kind of like binging and then trying
So
to...
the response is like you freak out that you just binged and you're trying to undo what you just did.
Exactly. And then you're either starving or many people, it might be an emotional thing, right? They're trying to push down their emotions through the food, and kind of the binge is like, it kind of transports you away from reality. So it might be, usually it has to do with weight, like wanting to either not gain weight or to lose weight, like the purging. But sometimes there's it's more complex. They might be many things involved, right? So that is bulimia.
Okay.
Anorexia is when there is a very severe food restriction that would lead either to weight loss or to, in case of children, for example, not developing, not growing because of the lack of nutrients in the body.
Children can have eating disorders?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Then, like, there are some cases with children at the age of 4 or 6 with eating disorders.
Okay, see, that's something I did not know.
There can be weight loss. However, we think of people with anorexia of being super thin, like emaciated. And yes, some people are. However, not everyone with anorexia is in a small body. There's it's called atypical anorexia, which it's not that atypical, but it's like people who actually look very big, like they have weight. They would enter into the categories that we would consider overweight or obese, etc. And they're actually really not eating anything, but it's what I explained before, that their metabolism has slowed down because of so many diets.
Wow.
That and the problem with them is that, like, medical, like they don't believe them. Like, they're like, no, she's lying, I'm sure she's eating way more. Like, so it's very hard because they have to deal with both the weight stigma and also the eating disorder.
Wow.
So it's basically, anorexia is restricting the eating.
Okay.
And body dysmorphia can be present in bulimia and in anorexia, usually more in anorexia, but not necessarily.
Right.
And it's that they don't see themselves as they actually are. They might be emaciated and they still think that they're so fat.
I'm just curious, is that a brain chemistry thing? Like, where does that come from?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And if you show, for example, someone with anorexia, you show them a picture of themselves, of their body, but you cover their face. I mean, not yours, their face. And they see, then they would say, oh, this person is very thin.
Got it.
But once they realize it's them, they say, oh my gosh, I'm so fat.
Wow. Okay, so there's like a disconnect there. Okay.
Yes.
Very interesting. Thanks for explaining that. You explained it really well. I want to go back to the eating disorder in children, the anorexia in children, because that is really something I did not know. How does a 4-year-old develop anorexia? My understanding of anorexia is a lot what you talk about, which is the emotional stressors in your life or as a coping mechanism or tool. How does a 4-year-old know to restrict eating based on I want to understand that.
I mean, we still don't know perfectly how that happens, because eating disorders are multifactorial in their origin, right? So a lot of it is genetics, a lot of it is like social exposure, a lot of it is just like brain chemistry. One thing that we do know is that more often than not, eating disorders start when someone loses weight severely. So let's just say like many diets lead to eating disorders. Not everyone who diets develops an eating disorder.
Yeah.
But most people who develop an eating disorder dieted or lost weight. Sometimes it happens like if someone got sick, for example, and lost a tremendous amount of weight, and you can see it on the growth chart of children and teens. Like there's all of a sudden there's like a fall in their growth chart, the weight, and it usually coincides when the eating disorder started.
Wow. So like for some reason it's like you start obsessing over the thing that's already happened to you. Okay. Very, very interesting. I want to talk about the external factors that you talk about a lot in terms of food and the relationship to food. Quote from your website. By the way, I recommend everyone check out your website because it's not a typical website. You have a lot of valuable information on there just by like clicking the homepage. So you write, oftentimes our eating challenges are connected to work, money, relationship, family, intimacy, life stresses, and so much more. I'm going to emphasize the so much more. Can you talk about the correlation between those things and eating habits?
Yeah, so if you think about it, what's the first thing we do when we arrive into the world is like we're being fed and hugged, both at the same time. So it's this link of affection and nourishment that we start making it since our day one on earth, right? So there is that kind of soothing that we automatically relate with food. And my teacher Mark David, who's the founder of the eating psychology program, like he said that the way we eat is the way we live, right? Like how we see the world. Yeah. So many times, if you think about it, like sometimes someone's stressed about money, so then that makes them want to eat more, or actually stops their appetite. Like family dynamics are complicated, and especially if you come from a family where food, like this whole relationship with food, is also complicated, or if there's a dieting history, or and also all the exposure we get all the time through, and now we have social media, but in the media, and like people constantly telling us that there's this kind of black and white mentality between eating good food and being a good person and doing things right, and eating bad food and being a bad human and doing everything wrong, right? So, and we classify like food, there's either one or the other. They can't be like, well, sometimes it's fine to eat whatever. We get so scared and so judgmental, and we feel so judged, and there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame around it. So that affects a lot. So if you think of all these different conditions, like our relationships, if someone just went through a breakup and is sad, food is there. You go to the supermarket, or you just walk around and you're gonna find a store, or you just open your cupboards, and it's socially accepted, right? Like you just open your ice cream, and it's okay if you're going through a breakup to eat the ice cream
It's in
straight from
TV
the tub.
everywhere. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious though, why would somebody who, when they get stressed or they're going through something hard, food is comfort for them. Exactly what you're talking about, the ice cream tub. For me and some other people in my family, when we get stressed, we cannot even think about the thought of food. Like, how does that happen?
Listen, there are many different theories. Some are like, because that is how you're wired, right? So that like you might. I have my own theory.
Let's hear it.
I think, I'll give it to you. So when we're in acute stress, like you need to get something done, you're like, you feel pressed for time, you just need to make a decision, like kind of in fight or flight, right? You just need to move fast. Our appetite gets lost, like because we can't afford to think of food when we just need to be doing things and like just thinking quickly and moving quickly. As opposed to chronic stress, which is that it's like in less, like it's day in and day out, and it never has like a time to replenish, right? It's the same thing over and over and over. We might feel the need to comfort ourselves with something because we're not giving it like an out in any other way. So we become hungry. We just crave them. Yeah. That is my theory. But
no, I like it. I think it makes sense because I'm thinking of examples where that relates. So you discussed that we often hear about fighting stress, which ties back into what you said. But how is it different from managing it when it comes to eating disorders? So fighting versus managing stress.
I think in eating disorders and with everything, I just wanted to mention before I forget that there's another eating disorder, which is binge eating disorder, which is the most common one.
Really?
And which is, you know, like I explained the binging and the purging of bulimia. The binge eating disorder is just basically binges like that are like consumption of like large amounts of food within like a 2-hour period. I mean, the DSM says like about like at least once a week for 3 months. That's
what qualifies. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into that later. So basically, we see stress all the time as our enemy, right? Like stress kills, stress causes disease, it causes inflammation, and that becomes even more stressful. We're stressed about stress.
Yeah.
And managing stress is like, there are all these different things. For example, sometimes you need stress, right? Like stress can be a driver for you to get things done, or for you to make decisions, or so sometimes you should welcome it. Actually, you need it.
Yeah.
I'm
like that.
Yeah, it propels you into doing things. But again, as I mentioned earlier, like when we're stressed, we also need to recover. Like, and this is like, for example, if you think like of a zebra that is being chased by a leopard, right, in the savannah or whatever, like it goes through so much stress trying to outrun the leopard, right? But later on, like it usually shakes it off. Like animals shake a lot. I mean, if it survived, obviously. But and then it goes back to normal. Like you come back to baseline, and that is very important. Like allowing yourself to come back to baseline through different practices. So I always like teaching my clients like some breath work and give them other tools. Like sometimes I use like EFT tapping.
What's that?
Sometimes EFT tapping is a really fantastic technique that you just say a statement, and it works with emotional issues or also with physical issues. Like if you have a headache, you start tapping and then you repeat phrases as you tap in like different points of your face and your chest.
Okay.
And it usually
like regulates your body?
Yeah.
Okay.
And your mind too. It's very
Wow.
interesting.
Okay.
And so that aromatherapy, or sometimes even just like, take a bath with Epsom salts. Sometimes it's about nutrition, right? Like, for example, magnesium can help with relaxation, some adaptogenic herbs, or there's also a group of herbs called nervines, which decrease your stress right away, like
Interesting.
chamomile, lemon balm. So, or just using cold, right? Like a cold exposure when you're very worked up, and then you just put your face on ice water, or your hands, or your whole body, as everyone's doing now, or just like the shower, very cold shower. All those different techniques, because then can help you manage your stress, so it doesn't become this excess in your life that rules it.
Yeah, that's actually really good. Really good advice. Separate from our conversation, like it's just helpful for everyone going through anything that's stressful. Yeah. I want to get into more personal things, and it's very closely related to what you're doing today. When I was going through your website, when I initially heard about you and met you, I was just expecting to read about eating psychology, and then you had a whole page where you talk about your story. It's such an emotional story. I'm like, whoa, what just happened? So let's get into it. Your mother was diagnosed with cancer when you were 6 years old, and you were where did you grow up?
In Mexico City.
Despite being given only 8 months to live, she actually lived for 28 years. And I thought that's where the amazing happy story ended. But
I wish.
Yeah, but it ends up being that she actually really struggled with a lot of different things because of her diagnosis. So I'm curious, I want to start from, what do you remember from that time? I know 6 is really young, but I'm sure it affected you at such a young age. She had brain damage and all the different things. If you can share about that experience.
Sure. I mean, listen, that was my experience, so I don't know any different, right? But yeah, it was like a really, really scary time. Even though everyone around my brother and I try to, make us feel better, it was hard to see my mom like that. And then the thing is, they were able to remove the cancer through chemo, through radiation therapy, through a bunch of surgeries, etc. However, she did have so much brain damage, and we didn't know that she kept deteriorating.
Really?
And I think that was kind of the hardest part, because at some point the cancer, she was cancer free, so we were yay, we're done, let's move on. We had to get used to a new reality.
Wow. First of all, I know you said it was your life, you don't know any different, but I'm sorry, that's something that's, I can imagine, very, very difficult to go through.
Thank you.
How did that affect your relationship with food?
So when I felt its effect in food was when I was older. It was actually when I finished high school. I spent 6 months in Israel, and I had also I was in a relationship before that, and the relationship ended right before I left. And then when I was there, I was feeling lonely, and I ate a lot, because that was my comfort. It was delicious ice cream, chocolate, everything. And this was also the first time living away from home, right? So then I realized I had gained a lot of weight, and when I came back, everyone was like, "Oh, what happened to you?" So I went straight to the diet doctor, who was the guru of the day in Mexico City, and he put me on a diet. I have to say, the good thing is that I learned to eat vegetables. So
congratulations.
Good. Thank you. But then it messed up my whole relationship with food, with my body.
Wow. How old are you? 18?
I was 18. Yeah.
Wow.
So I followed it to the T, and I was not losing weight. I also had a hormonal imbalance, definitely, and I was sad, right? So I really tried my best, but so it was very frustrating. I remember every time I would go into the doctor's office, I would get weighed, and I would leave in tears because I was not losing weight, and I was dreaming about food, like in my dreams, I was eating corn. Or it wasn't even, I was just eating a piece of bread.
Yeah.
But I was not allowing myself to. So yeah, even and then at the end, my body started kind of like slimming down a bit, even though the weight was still there. So then how this doctor did it is like you had to maintain like the diet except for 2 hours once a week. That is the perfect occasion for a binge.
I was
because
just gonna
would
say
just-
that sounds like a binge. Okay.
Exactly.
So that's what happened?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like my free time became like I would accumulate all my desires for
Oh my
a
gosh.
week, and then I would just go like crazy on them.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. But I thought I was following medical advice.
Yeah. That's the scariest part, is when you have somebody that you trust tell you something and it ends up being probably the worst thing you can do, but you don't think to
Yeah.
question it because you're being told by somebody that is an expert, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, always do your own
Exactly.
research. Did you ever struggle with your relationship to food before that, or was that the first time?
I mean, I guess when I was in Israel is when I started kind of trying to self-soothe through it.
Yeah.
But it became so complicated when I started dieting. And then after that, I stopped that diet, but I would be in and out. So I started binging. I guess not enough to be diagnosed with binge eating disorder, but often enough to be really hard.
I like that statement a lot, because a lot of people say they're not, according to the books, they don't have an eating disorder. And for them, that means I'm alone in this because I can't go to an expert. I can't go to a psychiatrist because I'm not diagnosed with this. And it's almost harder than being diagnosed with it, because you're in this really weird gray zone where you're struggling with something, but you're not, you're told basically, no, you're not almost good enough to be put in this box, right? So that, I think, is a very scary place to be in, I can imagine.
It is, and I mean, we call it disordered eating,
Yeah.
as opposed to eating disorders.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the eating disorders are the diagnosed ones, and but disordered eating, it is as hard, and it is it can make life miserable.
Yeah.
And everyone should be able to get help.
Yeah.
Because even just the thoughts in the morning, even if and that's why I say it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be diagnosed in order to need help.
Yeah. For me, it really took over my life. I was so obsessive with my counting calories and what I was eating, and nobody taught me. I didn't really have access to the internet at that point. It was just in my brain. And I just want to share this because I think a lot of people can, learn from this. My parents had no clue that I was suffering from an eating disorder, even though I dropped like 30 pounds. Because one, we're smart enough to know how to cover it up. I didn't really know what I was dealing with, but mostly because I ate dinner with my family every night, and I would demolish my plate because I was starving. And so all my mother saw was, okay, she's a healthy teenager eating a lot of dinner because she came home from school. And so when they were told I had an eating disorder, they were absolutely shocked and could not believe that they did not see this. So I think that's something that's also not talked about enough, is that just because you see those signs that your kid is, eating dinner or whatever, it doesn't mean that behind closed doors this is not really affecting them. So I think that's really, really, really interesting.
And then there's also sometimes even the feedback is like, great, you're being healthy, you're losing weight, great.
Right. Which is probably what happened to you, right? Because you had a lot of people tell you what the hell happened to you when you were away, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. So something else you say is difficult dance with weight, self-esteem, eating habits, loneliness, despair, anxiety, and ice cream took over my life for several years, until the day I decided to make peace with food. So you just shared your struggles and what you went through. Can you talk us through the process of changing that narrative for yourself from shame around food to a place of peace and self-love and who you are today?
So for me, I think that the moment that things changed, when I moved to New York, I I started like a master's degree at NYU called Food Studies, which is kind of like food anthropology. Like we studied food history and food and film.
Wow.
Like all these things about food that were not nutrition were just, and all of a sudden I realized how fascinating food is, and how and there were a lot of like chefs or former chefs in the program also. So it was very food oriented, but seen from a lens of like culture, society, all these amazing things about food, how fascinating they are.
That's amazing.
Like, so to me, I was like, this is amazing. So instead of being something that I associated with guilt, with shame, with negative emotions in general, it became something interesting and something you know, more like more powerful, and I started paying attention to how things tasted, and I started cooking a lot.
That's so cool.
Baking a lot. So it was that moment when I was able to make peace with food, because I welcomed it instead of fearing it.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And that's like I back then I developed this little tool without knowing. Even I even use it with clients sometimes. So I called it the 5-second rule. So before eating something, I would ask myself, why am I about to eat this? So one answer would be because this is delicious, it's artisanal, it's made by someone special, it's just like an amazing thing to eat. The other one would be because I'm hungry and this is nourishing. And the third one would be because I'm lonely, sad, angry, anxious, etc. Right? So I would just stop. I would just pause before eating and just trying to realize like, why was I about to grab that?
Yeah, mindful eating.
And yeah, it's mindful eating. And now I've added like a fourth option, which is because I usually restrict and not allow myself to eat this. And now, you know.
Okay, interesting.
So, but yeah, it is mindful eating. It's just stopping and asking yourself, why am I about to do this?
Yeah.
And instead of just like grabbing or skipping it, etc. Skipping and then regretting it.
Yeah. Now that you're in this wonderful place, do you find though that you still have moments where you go back to that mindset that you had when you were 18, or you find yourself slipping a little bit and start to fear food?
It's been many years. So, I mean, yeah, but I would say, yeah, sometimes on occasion I might overeat because if I was in a great restaurant or I was very hungry when I came, I'm not gonna say I always eat perfectly, but what I'm capable of doing now is just letting go, you know, like knowing, okay, I shouldn't have had that last piece of whatever, but I did, and then move on, you know, like just eat it. So I'm not carrying that shame and the guilt and the now I'm not allowed to eat for 3 days, or now I need to go to the gym, or I'm a bad person.
Right.
That is where the difference is.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you a little bit about a technique just to help anyone that's listening. A big part of your work is helping clients like reconnect with their hunger and fullness cues, right? I think sometimes when it's coming from an emotional place, overeating, you don't realize your body doesn't even have the chance to recognize that you're full. So what techniques help them tune into those signals?
Usually when I'm working with clients with intuitive eating, I use the intuitive eating workbook, which was created by the two dietitians who created intuitive eating. So it comes with a series of like different exercises that are helpful to come back to your body. And it is a process. That is the important part, because some people might feel impatient, you know, we would just want results right away. So it is little by little asking yourself. And it's also that like slowing down and being willing to ask your body. Your body is going to tell you.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's like these two questions can be helpful. So what am I feeling and what do I need? But you have to be honest with yourself. So, and you can't tell, because sometimes we confuse like a lot of our emotions, we can feel them, you know, in our torso, right? And hunger can also feel like in
Right.
that same area. So sometimes the signals can get like a
Yeah.
little bit confused
Yeah.
until we start observing. So the exercise is basically start observing, like how hungry are you? So we work with a hunger scale, right? So 0 is like I'm famished, I'm fainting, I just can't deal with life. 1 is like I'm so hungry, like I'm an awful person. 2 is like I'm hangry.
Yeah.
3 is like, oh, now would be a very good time to eat. 4 is like, oh, I think I'm getting hungry. 5 is neutral, I'm not hungry, I'm not full. Then 6 is like, oh, there's some food coming, I'm starting to feel something inside my body. 7 is like, oh, this feels very pleasant, I'm almost satisfied. 8 is like, I'm full. 9 is like, oh, I overdid it. This was a bit much. And 10 is like, I'm exploding
Yeah.
and I need
Yeah.
to undo my belt and go lay down and
Yeah.
I might throw up.
Yeah.
Right? So that scale, like trying to remember that scale,
Yeah.
because honestly, you want your body to be comfortable.
Right.
As comfortable as possible. So you don't want to put it into the extremes. You don't want it to be in
Right.
0 or 1, and you don't want it to be 9 or
Right.
10, because both feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, obviously you want to be hungry before you eat a meal. Yeah, because but you don't have to be starving
Right.
by the time you eat. And the same thing goes to fullness, right? Like, okay, it's time to stop. And yeah, we'll feel a little bit sad when it's time to stop if we're enjoying it, but knowing that we can, we have many other occasions to eat again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just allowing ourselves to respect the body in that sense,
Yeah.
like, because we tend to hurt ourselves, like emotionally and physically, very often. So this process of eating psychology and intuitive eating in general
Yeah.
they're ways of taking care of ourselves in mind and in body.
Yeah. And I think we're more and more realizing that there's a huge connection between the two, because they used to be two separate things. Yeah. I love, thank
Exactly.
you for sharing that. I want to end off by asking you for a piece of advice for anyone listening who is struggling either with just not the most positive eating habits or something a little bit more serious. What can they do to start the process of healing?
Ask for help. And it's hard because there's a lot of shame surrounding the topic, but it is so much easier. Like, the sooner the better. Like, that is without a question. The sooner you start dealing with it, the easier it is to recover. And yes, there's shame, and there's that, it's hard, especially with now, like, so many people losing weight with the injectables, with the GLP-1s, and it's hard to realize, but deep inside, know when it's affecting your life negatively.
Yeah.
So I would love for us as a society to start opening up. So thank you so much for having me, because it's also it's something we need to talk about.
I agree.
Because so many of us are struggling, and you don't have to have an actual eating disorder to benefit from help.
Absolutely. It's the only reason I started talking about it, because I think a lot of people look at people and they think, okay, you got your life together, you're good, and people don't realize what everyone's going through something, and something like an eating disorder or just a negative relationship with food is so stigmatized still. And even though conversations are becoming a lot more open about it, it's still something that is so shameful for people. And the first time I talked about it, I couldn't believe I actually talked about it, because it was like, this is something I swore I'm never gonna talk about. So thank you so much for coming on here and like sharing the education behind it and the science behind it. I think that's the start to understand it, because for me, the second I knew what was happening in my brain and my body, I was able to heal from it, because I can't heal from things that I don't understand personally, and I think a lot of people are like that. So really, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having me.
Thank you.
And thank you also for being willing to share and to just be open about it, because it's not easy, but it's very necessary.
Thank you.